We mark the 80th anniversary of the victory of the Chinese People's War of Resistance against Japanese aggression and the World Anti-Fascist War. He emphasized that China's contribution to victory in World War II deserves to be remembered by the entire world.
Chinese contribution is a contribution that was extremely important for the victory of the Allies.
He praised China's global initiatives, noting that now is the perfect moment to revisit the founding missions of the United Nations.
I see a perfect line of the concerns we have and the initiatives that you have mentioned.
Sharing his impression of President Xi, he said,
President Xi Jinping is that he is a man with a clear strategic vision, able to look at the long term, to define objectives for this long term.
UN Secretary-General António Guterres sits down for an exclusive interview with Leaders Talk. Stay tuned.
Hello and welcome to Leaders Talk, where we meet leaders, thinkers, and trailblazers. I'm Wang Guan. Greetings from the eastern coastal city of Tianjin, where this year's Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit is underway. During the summit, we're truly honored to be joined by His Excellency Mr. António Guterres, Secretary-General of the United Nations. I asked Mr. Guterres about his take on the mandate of the SCO and its alignment with the goals of the United Nations. This year marks the 80th anniversary of the victory of the Chinese People's War of Resistance against Japanese aggression and the World Anti-Fascist War, as well as the founding of the United Nations. With UN at 80, what are Secretary-General Guterres' personal reflections on war, peace, and development? And what will he do in the remainder of his tenure to reform a UN that is so often paralyzed by power politics and political rivalries? Here's our conversation.
On August 31st, Tianjin, China welcomed a globally anticipated SCO moment. More than 20 foreign leaders and 10 heads of international organizations gathered along the Haihe River to attend the largest summit in the 24-year history of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Together, they strengthened friendship, discussed cooperation, and mapped out a vision for shared development. Looking back to the turn of the century, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization was founded on the banks of the Huangpu River. Over the past 24 years, this first international organization initiated by China and named after a Chinese city has consistently upheld the Shanghai spirit, steadily maturing and growing in strength while demonstrating remarkable vitality. Today, the SCO has expanded from its 6 founding members into a big family spanning 3 continents, Asia, Europe, and Africa, bringing together 27 countries, nearly half the world's population, and about 1/4 of global economic output.
Secretary-General António Guterres, it is a true honor to welcome you to Leaders Talk on China Media Group.
I'm delighted to be able to be again with your station.
Let's begin with SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization. It is founded on the Shanghai spirit, which emphasizes respecting different cultures and civilizations, treating everyone as equals, and rejecting Cold War mentalities. How do you see the role of the SCO in today's world and its synergies with UN values and initiatives?
I believe that one of the most important things in order for a multilateral order to work is to have a perfect cooperation between the UN and regional organizations. Regional organizations know the problems of each area of the world better than a universal organization like the United Nations. And so in the cooperation between the UN and the Shanghai Cooperation Council, I think you can go much further than acting alone. And the objective of this presence is exactly to intensify the cooperation with an organization that has today an extremely important role to play. It represents a large percentage of the world population, and it is inserted in one of the most dynamic areas of the global economy. So I'm delighted to have this opportunity to participate in this meeting and to do everything possible to intensify the cooperation between our two organizations.
You've been attending the SCO for a couple of times,
of course.
And given the geopolitical transition that we're in, your take on the relevance of this SCO right now?
I believe that we need to build a multipolar world. We need to build a world in which all areas of the world, all cultures, all religions, all civilizations are able to work together. And multipolarity means that there is no domination, means that there is cooperation among equals. And in the efforts to build a multipolar world, the countries of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization are essential. And so I believe that what the SCO represents today is one of the basic conditions to move into a true multipolar world that unfortunately is not yet there. We are still moving in that direction, but there are many that would prefer not to have a multipolar world, but to have a world based on power relations and inevitably leading to a certain level of chaos in international relations that it's very important to avoid.
In describing the transition we're into multilateralism and multipolarity, you said we're in the purgatory of polarity, where countries are taking advantage of the current geopolitical device to maximize their own interests, acting with no impunity whatsoever. Can you explain to us this term, purgatory of polarity?
It has to do with the fact that we are not yet in a multipolar world, as I said, and in many aspects we are in a chaotic world. And the purgatory is the expression that represents that chaotic world in which we live. One can do whatever one is able to do. There is no respect for international law. There is no respect for the Charter of the United Nations. And a multipolar world does not mean that we do not need multilateral forms of governance. A multipolar world requires multilateralism. And the proof of that is Europe before the First World War. It was a multipolar Europe. I mean, there was France, the UK, Germany, Austria, Hungary, Russia. But there were no multilateral forms of coordination or cooperation. And the result was the war. So we need to move, and we see the emergence of different economies in the world with an enormous potential that are growing much more, with a much bigger speed than the traditional developed countries. So there is a new equilibrium being born at global level. We need to translate that equilibrium into cooperation relations among the different elements that will be decisive both from the point of view of security and from the point of view of the economy, and to guarantee at the same time that they accept in their cooperation to have levels of governance at global level in which I believe the UN system should be in the center.
80 years ago, the devastation of 2 world wars prompted the international community to reflect deeply and seek a path toward lasting peace. On June 26, 1945, representatives from 50 countries gathered at San Francisco's Veterans War Memorial for the signing ceremony of the UN Charter. China's representative was the first to sign, symbolizing the nation's historic leap from poverty and weakness to a central role on the international stage. This day was later designated as UN Charter Day. On September 2nd, Japan formally signed the Instrument of Surrender, marking the official end of World War II. On October 24th of the same year, the UN Charter came into effect and the United Nations was officially established, opening a new chapter in global governance.
Secretary-General Guterres, we're marking the 80th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations. China, of course, was a founding member of the United Nations, and in fact, it was the first signatory to the UN Charter. How would you describe and summarize China's contribution to the United Nations system and a UN-centered international order in the past decades?
China has been extremely active in all the areas of the I would say, mandate of the United Nations in peace and security, in sustainable development, and in human rights. We have, you are intensifying the cooperation between China and the United Nations. And I'd like to underline a few aspects. China today has an extremely important development cooperation policy. And so when one looks at the Sustainable Development Goals, a central objective for the United Nations, the Chinese contribution is absolutely essential. On the other hand, China has had a very active engagement in mediation of certain conflicts. And again, peace is one of the central objectives of the United Nations. China has had a leading role in the transition for renewables, a key element to fight climate change. And that is a central objective of the United Nations. So I would say that China represents today a fundamental pillar of multilateralism and a fundamental pillar of the work of the United Nations in itself.
Going forward, what will be the priority areas of China-United Nations cooperation for the next phase? Because you just met with our leader, President Xi.
I think that there are a number of areas that were identified in the Pact for the Future that was approved last year by the General Assembly of the United Nations. We identified how important it is cooperation in artificial intelligence and in the digital world. Not only cooperation among developed countries or countries that have a huge capacity like China in artificial intelligence, but cooperation to allow developing countries also to be part of the benefits of artificial intelligence. On the other hand, climate, of course, is an area of extraordinary importance, and we live in a moment in which the transition to renewables is demonstrating that renewables are the cheapest and the most effective way to produce energy. And again, China has a leading role on this. On the other hand, we are pushing for a new agenda for peace. And the new agenda for peace means dialogue, means cooperation, means that different cultures and different civilizations can work together. And China has expressed, namely with the Global Initiative on Civilizations, a very clear determination in this regard. And so if one looks at all the key aspects that are in the agenda of the activities of the UN, we have an important role for China to play.
Talking about World War II anniversary, we're marking the 80th anniversary of the Chinese people's resistance against Japanese aggression and also the World Anti-Fascist War. But as you know, Secretary General, in the Western literature, the focus is largely on, of course, the European theater, the Pacific War, monumental moments to honor. But also true that in the main Eastern battlefield, the Chinese people made tremendous sacrifices starting as early as 1931. We've endured the 14-year-long arduous struggle against fascism and imperialism, culminating in a suffering of over 35 million lives lost. So in your perspective, what would be a most fitting and proper historical perspective on World War II, on China's contribution to the Allied victory and to the eventual peace?
There is this idea that the World War started in 1939 and ended in 1945. But the truth is that the beginning of the Second World War was triggered by Japan against China, the famous incident that is well known. So to say that World War was 39 to 45 is indeed a unilateral vision. And we need to have a universal vision. And it's true that the resistance of China against Japan was for many years a decisive factor of resistance against Japan. And it had a fundamental contribution to weaken Japan, and that allowed for Japan to be defeated in the end of Second World War. So the Chinese contribution is a contribution that was extremely important for the victory of the Allies, that include China. And as I said, one needs to look at the Second World War in its entirety and effectively it started not very far from here. It started not very far from here. It ended also in the Pacific. I think, and this is true in many other aspects, we need to read history in a truly universal perspective, and not only in the perspective of the geographic area in which an historian belongs.
Thank you so much, Secretary General, for this acknowledgement and for the sacrifice happening in China
simply the truth.
And elsewhere.
It's simply the truth.
It means a lot to the Chinese people.
But it's the truth. I mean, I'm not inventing anything or saying something to please anybody. This is the truth, the historical truth.
80 years after the end of World War II, global governance stands at a new crossroads. The persistence of Cold War mentality, hegemonism, and protectionism continue to cast their shadow, while inadequacies and mismatches within the global governance system have become more evident than ever. On September 1st, at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Plus meeting, Chinese President Xi Jinping introduced the Global Governance Initiative. Following the Global Development Initiative, the Global Security Initiative, and the Global Civilization Initiative, this marks yet another significant public good that China is providing to the international community in the new era. Guterres welcomed the initiative.
As we mark the 80th anniversary of the United Nations and the victory against the Nazi-fascism, we must strengthen international cooperation for the 21st century and always put people first. And it is in that spirit that I welcome President Xi Jinping's proposal of a global governance initiative announced today, and the fact that it is anchored in multilateralism and underscores the importance of safeguarding the international system with the UN at its core and the international order underpinned by international law. Together, let us bring the Charter's promise to life and work for a future of peace, dignity, and solidarity.
In his interview with Leaders Talk on August 31st, Guterres also shared his perspectives on President Xi's Global Development Initiative, Global Security Initiative, and Global Civilization Initiative.
I think they correspond to a clear response to the realities that we face. I mean, we see a multiplication of conflicts. We see, as I said, impunity and disrespect for international law. So it is obvious that we need a new perspective of global security. On the other hand, there are deep inequalities in the global economy. And those inequalities are creating dramatic problems to countries in the developing world that are more fragile, that are drowning in debt, that have no access to concessional funding at sufficient levels, that are not able to take profit of the technologies that exist to improve the situation of their peoples. On the other hand, we have a financial architecture that is unfair, that is ineffective. So it is clear that we need new forms of governance at the global economic level, and so development initiative is essential. And on the other hand, we see that culture, religion in many parts of the world are being used, not that in themselves they are a problem, but they can be used by those that have, I would say, very negative objectives. They can be used to try to put people against each other. And it's fundamental to have a serious dialogue of civilizations. We have in the UN created a global alliance on civilizations, which proves once again that an initiative of that kind is absolutely necessary. So I see a perfect line of the concerns we have and the initiatives that you have mentioned.
Mm-hmm. In your meeting with President Xi Jinping, which just took place, it looks to us there had been this cordial and warm interaction between you both, big smiles on the face of both of you. What kind of leader does President Xi strike you as?
I think if I would have to choose one aspect that, in my opinion, characterizes President Xi Jinping, is that he is a man with a clear strategic vision, able to look at the long term, to define objectives for this long term, and not only to reach them, but to reach them in anticipation. We can give several examples. I remember that President Xi Jinping announced that China would reach 1,200 gigawatts of renewable energy in 2030. It's already done. At the same time, when many were still thinking on how to make diesel cars more perfect, China made a decision to bet on electric cars many years in advance. And so develop all the technologies that were necessary, and today we have Chinese electric cars dominating the market everywhere in the world and functioning extremely well. So in a world where so many things are decided one day and then changed the next day, and policies enable to the minimum of sustainability, I think this strategic vision is a very important characteristic, and I believe that it corresponds exactly to President Xi Jinping.
On Gaza, you once described the situation, the suffering of the people there as living hell, yet a major escalation now on August the 22nd. The UN organizations established that there's famine existing in Gaza, impacting as many as 500,000 people. Your response on this major escalation and your message to the parties involved?
Well, first of all, we need to stop this carnage. I mean, the level of death and destruction that we are seeing in Gaza has no parallel in any other period of my activity as an international civil servant.
You haven't seen anything like this in your tenure as UN chief?
Never. I think it's the most horrible panorama of death and destruction that I've seen. And now there is an offensive in Gaza City that will have again the tremendous impact, making hundreds of thousands of people being forced to move once again, and with an unimaginable level of suffering. So we must stop this. So first, an immediate permanent ceasefire. On the other hand, it is totally unacceptable to have hostages, and those hostages have been treated in a very horrible way. So hostages must be also released immediately and unconditionally. And then there must be complete free access for humanitarian organizations to distribute basic humanitarian items to the population in Gaza that needs food, that needs water, that needs medicine, that needs sanitation, that is in an absolutely dramatic situation, and famine was the result of that. So obstacles must end, any problems that are put to humanitarian action must stop, and humanitarian access must be guaranteed everywhere. Not forgetting that as occupying power, Israel has the objective to guarantee that the population in Gaza has food, has health care, because this is part of international law. And then it's not only Gaza, it's also the situation in the West Bank, where we see now decision to build the extension of settlements that would divide the West Bank into two, separating north and south, which of course would be another tremendous setback in the way to a two-state solution that, in my opinion, remains the only possible solution for two peoples to live in peace.
On climate, you said the era of climate change is ending and the era of climate boiling has begun. How far off track are we from the 1.5 degree target, and what will be the consequences if we can reach it?
We are not yet completely off track. It's still possible to reach 1.5 as a limit for global warming at the end of the century. But we are already with overshooting, and we absolutely must drastically reduce emissions immediately. If we do not do so, we will risk to come to the end of the century with the temperature somewhere between 2 and 3% increase, which of course would be completely devastating in our world.
Secretary General, during your tenure as the SG of the United Nations, you've been very committed to reform the United Nations that you said is paralyzed sometimes. How do you reconcile your personal desire to effect change with real-world limitations?
We always choose principles, and then we are determined to change the political reality for the principles to be respected and implemented. The day we give up on principles, that day the United Nations will lose what it is the essence of its raison d'être, which is to be an organization that is impartial, that respects the sovereignty of states, that has a charter in which international law is characterized as something that in all circumstances must prevail. We need to be determined to make the organization as effective, as cost-effective, and as committed to the objectives for which it was created.
And finally, what kind of a country do you think China has been, and where you see its fitting role in the world as it evolves?
My strong appeal is for China to maintain what is its strong commitment to multilateralism, and in a world where so many people still has no access to the benefits of progress, to share the extraordinary development that China has achieved. Extreme poverty is no longer in China. To share that through a very active, the continuation of a very active policy of international cooperation, to share those achievements to the rest of the world.
Secretary-General Guterres, thank you so much for your time.
It was a great pleasure.
Secretary-General Guterres sees great synergy between the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the principles of the United Nations. It is also remarkable, though, that during the interview as the Secretary-General of the United Nations, also a leader hailing from Europe, Mr. Guterres reminded the world of the limitations of a Eurocentric or Western-centric view on World War II history, reminding the world of the great sacrifices made by the Chinese people against fascism and militarism starting as early as 1931. And that'll do it for this edition of Leaders Talk. I'm Wang Guan in Tianjin, SCO. I'll see you again next time.